Good morning, it's Coffee Talk with Ann, and today we're going to be talking about when does it make sense to do a pre-inspection before you sell your home. So why would we choose to do a home inspection prior to listing the house? Now, it's not necessarily something we advise for everybody, but lately, because the market has been changing and shifting, and we have seen where we are listing properties that might be older, or the family gets it and they're going to put it on the market and they don't know the overall condition, it's not a bad idea to consider paying for a pre-home inspection. And what that does is it allows us to know the entirety of the house before we put it on the market. One, because it helps us understand how we might position the pricing. If a house needs a great deal of repairs, updates, maintenance, things of that nature, it makes sense to consider that when you're going to price the property. Secondly, it also takes away all those surprises. We recently took on a house that we put on the market, and because it was in a house that was inherited by a family, they had no idea the overall condition. They know that it needed some work, cosmetically for sure, but they didn't know all the ins and outs of how the roof was, how the electrical was. Well, we advised them to go ahead and do a pre-inspection, and we are very glad we did that because this house had some major things going on with it that we were able to go ahead and get estimates to do a couple of the items that we knew would be deal breakers for buyers moving forward. And it allowed us the time to understand what those things cost, how to get them done. But it also allowed us to have a transparency in the process. I am a big advocate of, for in a situation where you don't know enough about the house or it needs some things, sometimes it's best to approach it when you get it on the market as, hey, we know the house is older, we know it needs cosmetics, but we also know these other things about it. And it gives the buyer the opportunity to digest and kind of wrap their heads around what those things might be before they make an offer. And so in this particular case, it worked out beautifully because had we put the house on the market without knowing any of these things in advance, almost guaranteed the buyer or buyers would have walked away and or made negotiations incredibly difficult. So it allowed us to price position the house correctly, and it also allowed buyers the time up front to understand the entirety of the home inspection and know what they're getting into. And it also allowed for a smoother process during the home inspection. In this case, we sold it as is, no repairs, because the buyer knew going in, could look at the actual home inspection report and assess the condition and maybe even get a few ideas of what those things would cost before making an offer. So it really alleviated this whole headache where you kind of go in blind, knowing things might come up, but it could create a whole process where you don't actually keep the deal together because there's so many things going on. So that's when it really makes a lot of sense. Now, in a lot of cases, you go put the house on the market and the buyer pays for their own inspections, and there's this contingency period where the buyer gets to decide if they want to move forward or not, what they might want to ask for in repairs. Because the market is shifting, we're finding more and more buyers are asking for more and more things. They want a certain condition expectation happening. So sometimes it makes sense to look into something, whether it's an item that maybe the seller knows about that could be an issue, or having a walkthrough with an inspector to say, hey, what are the things that you would see that a buyer might make a big deal of or have an issue with that we can address upfront without having it, interfere with all the negotiation of the process. So it's really case by case. We don't always recommend it, but in this particular case, or in cases like where it makes more sense to know up front, we highly recommend it. So if you have any questions about that, or if you're thinking about getting on the market and you're like, hey, would that be a good idea for my situation? Let us know. We'll help you kind of guide you through that process.